This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
Welcome to NPR.
Which is now also WGBY.
Which is now a lot of things. It's the, what is it?
Don't confuse our audience. Come on, let's talk poetry.
We get big Yiddish. WGBY, poems from Rich Michelson.
Okay,
No, I don't know.
let's play the intro again. Let's
Okay,
start
here we
over.
go, all right.
We're going to start over.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.
Start over while we're on the air. Okay.
Yeah, there we go. Good. Take
Welcome,
two.
welcome to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio with erstwhile poet laureate Rich Michelson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome.
Did he say erstwhile?
Erstwhile, yeah. I am no longer. I have been dethroned. That's a beautiful word that actually Mr. Bill Newman taught me. Erstwhile. We learn things every time. My guest, Jericho Brown, one of the most wonderful poets writing in this country today. He has fellowships from the Guggenheim Foundation, the Radcliffe Institute for Advanced Study at Harvard. His first book, Please, won the American Book Award. His second book, The New Testament, won the Ansfield Wolf Book Award. He is a rock star of poetry. He is on a multi-city tour, heading out to L.A. later today for the Los Angeles Book Festival. Yeah. His new book, The Tradition. I'm holding it up. It is beautiful. Look at this cover. It is gorgeous. Jericho is in town. He was at Amherst College yesterday. He read at Amherst Books, our wonderful local independent bookstore, last night. And we were so pleased to nab him before he heads out of town. Jericho, welcome.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me.
Congratulations on this tradition, the tradition. It is wonderful. Your work is really... what I love about your work, I mean, I love a lot of things about your work, and we'll talk about maybe form later, but let's start with theme. And your work is political. It's about the black body at risk, but it makes it individual. I mean, you read these poems, you feel like, you're bringing what we're all dealing with into the individual, and therefore it hits us. I mean, is that a fair assessment? Is it?
I think it's a fair assessment. We've heard a lot about this supposed black body. I'm really interested in black people and people in general, and whether or not we can tell the truth to one another, whether or not we can stop calling controversial things that we've decided to deal with every day and deal with those things in a much more direct way. We're living in a time now where it's gotten to a point that mass shootings are so completely normal to us that they can't even make the top of the news. So that kind of thing, I think, is a byproduct of the era, and I want us to be honest about the byproducts of this era, and I want us to be honest about certain traditions that we've accepted and that we're living with as if they're okay. And I think if we can be honest about them, then maybe we can actually do something about them. So that's part of what the book begins to get at.
Let's give people a taste of your work. So how about, would you read one of my favorite poems in this book is Bullet Points?
Yeah, sure, I can
And
read
I think
Bullet
that
Points.
talks a little bit about what we're talking about right now.
Yeah. Bullet Points. I will not shoot myself in the head, and I will not shoot myself in the back, and I will not hang myself with a trash bag. And if I do, I promise you, I will not do it in a police car while handcuffed or in the jail cell of a town I only know the name of because I have to drive through it to get home. Yes, I may be at risk, but I promise you, I trust the maggots who live beneath the floorboards of my house to do what they must to any carcass, more than I trust an officer of the law of the land to shut my eyes like a man of God might, or to cover me with a sheet so clean my mother could have used it to tuck me in. When I kill me, I will do it the same way most Americans do. I promise you, cigarette smoke, or a piece of meat on which I choke, or so broke I freeze in one of these winters we keep calling worst. I promise if you hear of me dead anywhere near a cop, then that cop killed me. He took me from us and left my body, which is, no matter what we've been taught, greater than the settlement a city can pay a mother to stop crying, and more beautiful than the new bullet fished from the folds of my brain.
Jericho Brown, from his brand new book, The Tradition. You're listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, on the Bill Newman Show. This is Rich Michelson. Wow.
Yeah,
You know, it's... dead air is not good on the radio, but you need to...
I would
to
like
take
to
a
ask you a
step.
question.
Yeah,
When you
appreciate it.
compose your poetry, is it in response to an event? Is it immediate? Is it in almost real time, or is it a reflection afterwards?
It really depends on the poem. It changes, and I think in that particular poem that I just read, it was in the event and in the moment, very close, right after the death of Sandra Bland, and trying to figure out, what really could have happened there, how strange that event turned out to be, particularly when somebody dies in a cell who seemed just a few hours before to be fighting for her life. And to die in a cell where there is video playing up until the point that she makes the decision to hang herself with a trash bag. It seems that how is it that the video suddenly goes out when there is the event of her actually committing suicide? And things like this are actually happening all over the country. Jesus Huerta in North Carolina, Victor White III in Louisiana, all people who managed to shoot themselves while handcuffed and in police custody. And I think about these things, and I don't just think about how odd the event seems. I don't think about whether or not I'm some sort of a conspiracy theorist. What I think about are these people's parents and how suddenly they're without a child and without any real kind of explanation for how their child is not on this planet anymore. So those are the kinds of things that if I see, I can almost immediately begin to write about. I have lines around that. There's so much emotion for me around that there's language, because I'm thinking about my mother, and I'm thinking about my own death, and how a sudden death would indeed affect my mother in crazy ways, and how she would want answers. And I'm a person who likes answers. I like to know what's going on when my tax dollars are involved. So I think in that case, yes. But sometimes there are things that come back to you from your childhood that turn out to be poems, experiences that you don't really understand until you're much older. And those experiences will come to you in the middle of a day where you're doing something else and not understanding something, and something clicks and you suddenly understand what something you learned from 8th grade was all about, right? Or there's a poem that you mentioned earlier today, Rich, just about my mom getting up early to go to work. And, she spent all this time taking care of these flowers, these morning glories, and they would open up before she could even see them because she was already gone to work. So just kind of, of course, I took that for granted when I was a kid, I mean, that it was for me. Those flowers were for me, not really for her. Just like a lot of the stuff she did for me. So those are the kinds of things I'm trying to get at in this particular book.
There's something about getting older and having these reflections and saying, oh my God, I actually remember something when I was 6 and 8 years old,
Yeah.
and it stays with me, and it's very vivid, and I haven't thought about it in a long
Yeah.
time, but it's a part of me.
Yeah. And you also have the opportunity to forgive a bunch of folk. I mean, when you're old enough to pass by mirrors quickly enough to see your dad, you suddenly feel a lot differently about your dad. I mean, it's just true. I mean, what's happening to me in my life right now is if I pass by a mirror too fast, I'm like, what are you doing here? Like, what's this guy at my house for? What's going on? And I'm amazed by the fact that I'm sitting here looking like the guy that I used to fight all the time. How do I look like you? How'd you do that to me?
That's interesting. I mean, you talked a little bit last night about the responsibility of the imagination, and that you're trying to change the culture. Mm-hmm. But if you do change the culture, your job as a poet is to fight against the culture you have just instituted.
Exactly.
And I find that interesting. And one of the things I love about your work so much is I feel in the poems are always searching. I think, more so than the poem you just read, but I feel your mind thinking as you're going through the poems and bringing in a little bit of everything and then making it cohere. So talk a little bit about what is the responsibility of the poet in these times?
Yeah, I just think we have to go against whatever the current is. The poet actually turns out to be the great balance. The poet turns out to be the person who is outcast enough to look at things and tell the truth about them. And I think I like that job. I really like the opportunity to be able to tell the truth about things and to be against culture. And as a counterculture being in this world, I have to also understand that I won't be understood. And that's why poets create such wonderful community for themselves. That's why we get excited when we see each other. We're sort of automatic best friends because we know that in our writing, we've always been doing exactly what we're told not to do. And that is to use our imagination in inventive ways to see possibilities that are otherwise not there, right? And to notice when things are not going exactly as they should go, and to be honest about that. And I think that's the kind of work that I'm most interested in my writing and in my reading. And I'm really excited about the fact that we all get to share the same social media, the same television stations, that whatever's going on, you talked about the workings of the mind, and that's part of the workings of the mind, the things that I'm seeing on the news as well as the things that I'm seeing in the checkout line in the grocery store, as well as the things I'm seeing when I make love or when I fall in love or when I have a memory, as we said, from childhood. All of that's got to go into the poem. And I think the world asks us to be a little less complex than that. The world actually asks us to be a lot more surface and to actually represent some single or singular identity. Nobody's of a single identity. Nobody's of a singular.
You've always
identity.
felt, you grew up feeling as an outsider in the society. You're a black man, you're a gay man. And you bring all that into your work. Give us another poem.
Yeah,
because
sure.
That's the crux of it. This is just
I'll read that.
Beautiful work.
I'll read that poem since I mentioned 4 Day in the Morning earlier. I'll read that poem. 4 Day in the Morning. My mother grew morning glories that spilled onto the walkway toward her porch because she was a woman with land who showed as much by giving it color. She told me I could have whatever I worked for. That means she was an American. But she'd say it was because she believed in God. I am ashamed of America and confounded by God. I thank God for my citizenship in spite of the timer set on my life to write these words. I love my mother. I love black women who plant flowers as sheepish as their sons. By the time the blooms unfurl themselves for a few hours of light, the women who tend them are already at work. Blue. I'll never know who started the lie that we are lazy, but I'd love to wake that bastard up at 4 in the morning, toss him in a truck, and drive him under God past every bus stop in America to see all those black folk waiting to go work for whatever they want. A house? A boy to keep the lawn cut? Some color in the yard? My God, we leave things green.
Jericho Brown, his new book, The Tradition. It is one of the most important books of poetry that has come along in some time. Please find it at your local bookstore. You are listening to NPR, Northampton Poetry Radio, with Rich Michelson. Thank you, Jericho.
Thank you so much.
This is Bill Newman, WHMP.